Over the past few months, some Tapestry members and I have been learning more about homelessness and the people affected by it. This wasn't a particularly personal issue. I had only a little exposure to people living without homes from back in college when I was briefly a social work major. But two different things brought this issue into our scope at Tapestry. One was the arrival of Reverend Raina Hamry. In June, we as a congregation voted to bring Raina to join us as affiliated community minister. And she has several different pieces of her ministry. One of them is addressing the issue of homelessness, and she's asked us to come along on that journey with her. The other way that homelessness has come up and has been this rising tension and anxiety right here in Lake Forest. On social media and in public meetings, some of our neighbors voiced their fear and anger about people experiencing homelessness. The word I would use is disgust. Sadly, they seem to be disgusted not with the economic, family, or medical conditions that have caused these people to be homeless. They seem disgusted by the people themselves. And hearing my neighbors publicly voice their disgust at other human beings has stirred something within me, and I don't think it's something that is going to go away very soon. In the midst of all that anger and confusion, a good, concrete improvement to the situation is emerging. A development company is working to build an affordable housing complex in Lake Forest with 10 units dedicated to people who are chronically homeless. It would be just off El Toro and Raymond near the post office. This is an opportunity for the city of Lake Forest to make a meaningful dent in a huge problem. Another great opportunity is emerging in Laguna Hills. Rona, I'm putting you on the spot here, but Rona's going to talk to City Council there on Tuesday night about the possibility of doing something there to help. So if you're curious, if you live in Laguna Hills or Laguna Woods, or if you're just looking to do something Tuesday night to make a difference, you might talk to Rona after the service. Can you wave your hand so people know who you are? Awesome. So in the midst of all this information and opportunity, we did what good Unitarian Universalists do. We had a meeting. A few of us got together to talk about how Tapestry might engage in combating homelessness and how to support our neighbors without homes. And some really good ideas came up, but it became time to set a goal. How would we know we were successful at this effort? So based on the data that in 2018 there were around 100 people without homes in Lake Forest, we set the goal of having 125 spaces in supportive housing in Lake Forest by 2025. This doesn't mean building a shelter where people are warehoused overnight in dirty, cramped spaces. This means a safe, personal space where someone can actually thrive, like a home. 125 spaces in Lake Forest by 2025. We went back and forth wondering if this was too ambitious. Finally, we agreed that, for one, the only solution to homelessness is housing, and a goal that doesn't solve the problem isn't much of a goal, is it? Today in worship, we're talking about our willingness and our ability to envision a better world. And I don't mean slightly tinkering with the way things are or making incremental change. I'm talking about reimagining the world. And dreaming big takes guts, but it can change things. I poked around a little bit on the internet this week. The Wright brothers took their first successful flight in 1903. Prior to that, human flight seemed like a pipe dream to most people. And now, every single day, 8 million people take to the air. It took some serious dreaming and commitment to get us there, but we did. And no one's looking back. Thinking back to that goal of having 125 spots for people experiencing homelessness here in Lake Forest seems almost quaint by comparison. I've said this before in sermons, but I want to say it again as a reminder to myself. There's no concrete reason for people to be hungry or homeless in the United States. There's no actual barrier preventing our brothers and sisters from having enough and being secure. Occasionally the question comes out, what about those people who choose to stay on the streets? Some people actually choose homelessness. And it's true. Some do, a small number do. And it's kind of an interesting conversation. It's something worth discussing after we've created housing for the tens of thousands of people waiting on lists who would love nothing more than a safe space to call home. In some ways, it seems like a grand dream to end hunger and homelessness in the United States. In other ways, it's actually pretty basic. The title of this sermon today comes from a book called Reimagine the World. The author, Brandon Scott, takes a deep, deep look at the parables of Jesus, along with a bunch of other scholars who are interested in the history of it all. They think that the parables, those short stories, are probably the closest link that we have to the person. Of course, nothing he said was written down directly, and we know that the Bible is a compilation of a lot of different sources, at least I hope we know that. And while there are differences between those sources, the stories that he told are the most similar in their different recordings. In that oral tradition, people memorized and shared stories, they passed them down. We Unitarian Universalists like to think of Jesus as a social revolutionary. This scholar actually didn't find any evidence for him fomenting political revolution. There is no evidence of political organizing. He suggests that the revolution was actually in casting a radically different vision for the way the world might be. And he painted this vision in clear and specific contrast to the world as it was. And what we hear as quaint little stories today were really radical at the time. We don't have a lot of time to go into the parables, but I want to give you a couple of short examples. We all know the story of the Good Samaritan, right? The most despised of enemies becomes the model of compassion. The idea of the Good Samaritan is pretty easy to dismiss for us. But how about some perspective? In today's climate, we might hear the story of the compassionate member of ISIS, or the good Nazi. It's a little more challenging, right? In another story, we hear of the prodigal son who goes off doing all sorts of unspeakable things with his father's money. He runs out of money and comes home to dad, presumably the image of God in the story, and the father falls all over himself, welcoming his son home. He goes out of his way, embarrassing himself publicly. Meanwhile, the good son, the one who stayed home and followed the rules, he pouts in the corner, feeling left out of this love fest. Now, this is not how family or honor or masculinity or God were supposed to work in the ancient world. These stories and the metaphors, the mustard seed, the empty jar, the leaven, they were all shocking to people to hear because of the different way they described a possibility. So why do I bring all this Jesus stuff up, you ask? Well, because I think having the courage to imagine a different way of being is really, really important. It doesn't have to pertain to Jesus or the kingdom of God. Brandon Scott, that author, describes it this way. He says, hope has power, not because it's a concrete program, a worked out plan or a blueprint, but because it creates a counter reality to the default moral world. It says things don't have to be this way. I want to invite us into taking the risk of hoping in ways that are a little bit scary. I want us to remember and to occasionally say, things don't have to be this way. For a couple hundred years, Unitarian Universalists have been really invested in science and in reason. It's one of the things that set us on our own trajectory as a religious tradition when we insisted on taking history and geography seriously when we looked into Christianity. And I love that we take science so seriously, but I fear that we too quickly take what is known about our world and misinterpret that as a limit for what is possible. The scientific facts that we know are a platform from which to dive deeper into our understanding. And when it comes to social sciences, I want to challenge us all to think more carefully about what we think our human community is capable of. A lot of times I hear people say, well, people are just too greedy. People won't do that. People are too lazy or too selfish to do X, Y, or Z. And what I'm beginning to hear in those statements of cynicism is, I am too greedy. I am too lazy. I am too selfish to make that adjustment in my living. I'm not brave enough to live in a different way. And something powerful changed in my perspective of people's willingness to live into the world they imagine when some Tapestry members started opening their homes to immigrants seeking asylum in the United States. So many discussions of immigration and asylum, and I know you have heard these, so many are couched in scarcity. The argument suggests there's just too many people. There isn't room. What are we supposed to do? Open our homes and just let them come live with us? And after a few Tapestry members had done exactly that, after they had opened their homes, I was able to say with a straight face, yes. Yes, that's one very good option. When someone comes to the doorstep of your community fleeing violence and persecution, opening your home is one viable option. In fact, it's a great option if the world that you imagine living in is one that's more compassionate. More and more, I hear cynics say, people can't, people won't, people are too lazy or greedy. More and more, I'm beginning to understand that they're really talking about the life that they're willing to lead. And it's okay to know the limits of your own generosity. Boundaries are a good thing. But don't put that blame on other people. I want to close this sermon talking a little bit about the relationship between hope and action. One of the most valuable tools for increasing hope in our lives is taking the actions that we can to create the world we dream about. Those may be big moves, they may be quite small, but exercising the power we have brings some sense of meaning and some purpose and some trust that other people will also do what they can. It begins to chip away at problems that might otherwise seem insurmountable. I've seen this most strongly through the work and emotional experience of Friends of Orange County DTVs. Yesterday, I got an email with the news that FOCD passed a major milestone. 7 years after beginning this little organization, they conducted their 10,000th visit with a person in detention. That's 10,000 times that So that's 10,000 times that people sat down face to face to have a conversation. 10,000 times someone from Orange County got to know someone from another country a little bit better. It's 10,000 times that someone isolated by an amoral bureaucracy was greeted by a smile and a truly caring human companionship. In the email that Peggy wrote, she said, "We have found this work both life-changing and profoundly fulfilling. And through it, we've had the privilege of gaining lifelong friends and diverse extended families here, all around the United States and the world. Friends of Orange County detainees and their volunteers have witnessed some devastating moments of lives being ruined. We've seen families separated and innocent people deported to countries where they will most certainly be murdered. And over the last few years, we've seen an already broken immigration system become even crueler. In the midst of all that, for volunteers doing something, whether that's a visit once a month or turning your passion into a full-time volunteer career, doing something chips away at that feeling of hopelessness. There are plenty of things to worry about in 2019. Politicians and media are in their heyday, selling fear and outrage and hopelessness to an audience that seems always hungry for more. But if we're willing to think outside of the box, if we're willing to reimagine the world, we find hope in the awareness that it doesn't have to be this way. Amen.